she's got someone coming around to fix a wedding dress or something.
Okay, scratch that. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is episode 25. 25, halfway to a half century, a quarter of a century rather. And this is the third of a 3-part series called Heading North to Meet the Dawn. And if you were listening to last week's episode, you'll realise now, of course, the Dawn is none other than the unbelievable master of Basie, which certainly in Japan, in terms of the jazz joint culture, is undoubtedly regarded as the Mecca, the place to go, the place to be, and just this beacon of jazz kisa culture. Would you agree with that assessment, James?
100% agree. When I first started my website back in 2007 and started telling people that I was, I'm going around keeping a diary and all the jazz joints that I'm really into in Tokyo, I started hearing about it back then. And, it's strange because the more you hear about something, you kind of instinctively think, well, maybe it's actually not that good. I know some less well-known places and, I'm doing a deep dive here. I'll get there eventually. So I put it off, and then I had kids and I wasn't traveling, et cetera, et cetera. And so for whatever reason, until we started our project, I'd never taken the Shinkansen up north to Iwate Prefecture to go visit Basie. So when we started talking about heading outside of Tokyo, this was at the top of our list, wasn't it, of places that we had to get to?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like I said in last week's episode, I knew of all the places that I would not be able to photograph, this would not be one of them, and I would have to try and get there before I left Japan. And I just remember, he dropped us off. We'd had that mad, I've been up at God knows what time to get the Shinkansen that morning. We'd had that mad discovery of Royce. We'd been dropped in front of Basie by the owner of Royce in his car. There'd been this kind of cryptic comment about the ashtray. And then, of course, we'd heard from a lot of people and the owner of Basie, he really seems to split the crowd. And certainly before we went there, and indeed after, when we were down in Kyushu and so on, when you mention Basie, you always get one of two reactions. It's either, he's a bit of a difficult character, or, oh, he's a legend. So I think I remember certainly myself being quite nervous. I remember thinking, okay, I've got to make sure that I really document this place in all its glory. And also I was thinking, God, what if we've come all this way and it's going to be one of these things where, the guy's like, get the hell out of here. We're like, who are you? What do you want? And it was going to be a wasted trip. So I just remember when we initially opened that door, with the little bell on it and walked inside and the music was playing, genuinely, it sounds ridiculous, I know, but genuinely being quite nervous and like full of sort of trepidation.
Yeah, no, it completely, because, as you said, we'd heard so much about it. Sugawara Shoji, at the time, this was, what was this, 4 or 5 years ago when we went now? I'm blanking.
It would have been, it would have been 2017, 16. So it was only 3 years.
Oh, 17. Okay, so 17. Okay, Sugawara Shoji, he was 75 years old when we went.
Is he?
Yeah, he was born in 1942. He was born in the town of Ichinoseki. Okay, and so he opened the cafe in his hometown, but he did go down to Tokyo, like a lot of the cafe owners that we have met around the country, and we will go into much further detail about this in a special episode later on. He used to hang out in the cafes of Shinjuku in particular. He was a Waseda University student. He was a band leader at the time in one of the swing bands, and he went on to not only open the cafe, but he became a bit of an audio expert, a journalist, a photographer, and pretty well known throughout the country for a lot of the music work that he was doing with bands who were coming to play here, jazz bands who were coming to play here. So over the years, Basie and Sugawara-san himself sort of acquired this reputation of being, as you said, like a mecca for jazz fans, for audio fans, and he himself became this kind of shifty, legendary character where you didn't know if the stories that you were hearing were true or not. So definitely I felt the same kind of emotion when we were walking in there, and we walked in, and it was still pretty early in the day. I think it was, in my notes, I had it being 11:30, so they were just really open. Now, we did call ahead, and I had spoken to one of the female staff members just to make sure that they'd be opening on this Saturday. So we knew that the staff would be there. We did not know if he was going to be there or not. And so we went in, and I remember my first impression was just how large it was. I mean, compared to almost all the cafes that we've been spending time in on our trip, Basie is huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of... I think actually you had called a couple of times and got a fairly gruff response, something along the lines of like, we're not a train timetable or something like that, right? So I think that the opening hours, even when we got there, we'd kind of expected perhaps to have, maybe been too early, or, as we've had in the past sometimes.
I forgot about that. Yes, I did call because it was the female staff member, the younger lady who was quite kind. When I spoke to Sugawara-san himself on the phone and asked him about, is it a far walk from the station, or, do the trains come very often? And that's when he replied that, I think his exact phrase was like, I'm not a station attendant. I don't know the times.
Yeah, which seems a fair comment. I mean, I didn't realize you were asking that level of detail. It's like you've never heard of the internet. But listen, we went in, and I think probably as well for me, like we had your friend Justin with us, and I think maybe for him it was probably even more bizarre because we kind of came in and very reverently. I mean, it was almost like an entering a church or a temple kind of vibe. And I think we were just it was like someone walking through a china shop and you don't want to turn around and knock anything over and cause a scene. And you can see on the second photograph on the site, that's actually taken through the door. So we opened that door and we went straight to that table that you can see in front of us. And curiously, perhaps the kind of the bulk of the sound system is actually in that part of the cafe. So I don't know if maybe over the years it's grown in size or it's kind of spread out or whatever. But we sat at that little table that you can see there with our stuff. And actually, I think you can see some bags on it as well. And again, there was that kind of sort of, I suppose, that little ripple of like, oh, hello. And we looked across, and of course, eventually the lady came across to take our order, and we sort of very hesitantly ordered a few beers. We were really trying to check what was okay and what wasn't okay. And I think we were just so desperate not to mess it up or look like idiots that we just sat, we chatted, completely. We had a drink.
Very conveniently, you stood up to say, I need to check the lighting around here, see if I can get the pic. So James, why don't you go and talk to him?
Now, hang on a minute. Whoa. Wait a minute, right?
That's definitely what happened.
This is how memory, I mean, I know that we're getting older, but I thought your memory would be better than that still. But anyway, here's how I remember it, right? And I'm pretty sure this is the definitive version.
Tokyo Jazz Joint Rashomon.
So we were sitting at the table, and when she came over with the drinks, I said to her, oh, actually, we've come down from Tokyo. And she sort of said, oh, right, okay. And I said, we're doing this project. Would it be okay if we could photograph the place? And she said, yeah, that's fine. Just don't photograph any customers. Now, at that moment, there weren't any customers there. Then I went for a little bit of a wander around and actually went to the toilet. And when I came out of the toilet, you were up and wandering around. Now, I went back to the table, took a few more photographs, and next thing, I looked around, and just for context, when we came in and sat at that table, over to our right in the corner was Swifty Sugawara himself, sitting at this huge round table. And as you can see from the photographs, he was wearing this beautifully pressed cream blazer. Fingers are covered with rings, still had the sunglasses on, and he was writing with this beautiful black fountain pen in a book, some kind of, we thought maybe poetry or something, but in this beautiful Japanese calligraphy. And we were like, oh, he's here. He's actually here. And I'm fairly sure that when I went to the toilet, by the time I came back out of the toilet, you were wandering around. And I remember thinking, oh God, if he's walking about taking photographs with his iPhone and that shutter sound's still on, we're going to be thrown out. And then next thing, I think you'd struck up a conversation with him because we'd already had a couple of drinks by then. So maybe the confidence was up. And you then sat down, and before we knew it, I think you'd come back over and said, "Oh, he's invited us to come and sit at his table." And then literally, it was like someone clicked their fingers, and these three female staff members appeared at our table, and they moved all our drinks, all our bags and jackets over to this big round table to sit with Swifty. That's how I remember it.
Partially true. I will maintain. I will maintain till the end that I was the one to go up and make the quick introductions.
Oh, you did. You did.
Went around to do the testing, but maybe that was just a coincidence.
Yeah.
But yes, it was funny because as soon as I introduced myself and I said, "Oh, we came up and we're just taking pictures around the region. We're doing this project, and I met so and so in Tokyo, and they said I had to come to Basie." And I think as soon as I spoke to him in Japanese, that relaxed him because, as we came to find out, unlike most of the cafes that we've been to and bars, Basie is very well known. Outside of Japan, whether it's jazz-connected people or audio-connected people. So Basie's been profiled in audio magazines, and obviously a lot of people who have come over with jazz musicians, whatever, have been to the place. So he is very well used to dealing with non-Japanese people and even speaking a little bit of English. But when I spoke to him in Japanese, I could see that he relaxed a little bit, and I said, look, it's really great that we could finally come up here. We wanted to come early so we would not disturb the customers and take pictures. He's like, oh, it's fine. Take whatever pictures you want and sit down. And I was like, okay, don't need the second invitation. So, as you said, one of the waitresses brought not only all of our bags over, but proceeded to bring a tray of, more cans of beer and whiskey highballs. Again, this is 11:45 in the morning, and we had a long day ahead of us.
Yep.
And I just thought, you know what? I mean, screw it. Let's just dive in, man. Like, when are we going to get back here and be able to hang out with him? So, and not only was he forthcoming, of course, he never once took off the sunglasses.
No. And I mean, the photograph that I took of him, obviously, there's one where he was kind of getting ready for it, and then there was one that he posed. And I suppose it's become one of those photographs that's iconic of the project, certainly. And I would say probably if you had to sum up the project in one picture, that could definitely be a contender. I mean, it has the owner, it has this beautiful background of records, audio equipment, signatures, memorabilia, and it just really says everything about this culture in one picture. And I'm so delighted that I was able to meet him. And not only that he agreed to have his picture taken. And of course, as you said before, he was a photographer himself, which I'll come back to in a little bit. And of course, he's used to media attention. In fact, I think there's now a documentary that's been made about Basie in Japanese, which I know you and I have been trying to contact some people to get it shown.
Breaking news. As you know, we've been in a lockdown around the world, and the movie was scheduled to come out quite a few months ago, obviously had delayed. Movie theaters now opened again in Japan, and it will just be coming out September 18th. So if you're listening to this afterwards, hopefully you will see our comments about it up on the website. We'll put it up on social media. I will certainly be going to check it out on opening night. And for any listeners in the western part of the world, stay tuned. As Philip, as you mentioned, we're working on hopefully getting this to be shown over on that part of the world.
Yeah,
a documentary all about Mr. Sugawara. Yeah,
we've got some plans to do an exhibition here. It'll be the first time that the prints have ever been shown in Ireland. And we're hopeful perhaps in conjunction with Queen's Film Theatre in Belfast to maybe get the documentary shown as well to go alongside the photo exhibition. So keep tuned for that. We'll let you know when we know. But yeah, I mean, it just, he's probably used to that kind of attention, but very humble guy. We were slightly terrified. Like when you see him sitting at that table and doing his thing, you just think, oh no, like, we're going to do something stupid or say something stupid or whatever. But he was very gracious, very friendly. And we chatted probably for a good hour and a half, I think.
Well, we did. I mean, we chatted exactly right. We chatted for about an hour and a half. Obviously had a couple too many drinks. And then, don't you remember, now I have this photo up on my own Instagram feed, and I'm sure you have a copy too, but an old friend of his came by.
That's right.
And sat down. And if you can imagine, so if you're looking how dandy Swifty is, this guy took it to the next level. Completely bald, wearing, John Lennon, those kind of round glasses, but they were sunglasses. I'm sure that he was wearing either like a tie or a cravat or something like that. He sat down. They're two old friends, known each other since they were kids. And it came out that that this guy used to be the editor of Playboy magazine in Japan for many, many years, and had lived down in Tokyo, had recently retired and moved back up to the hometown of Ichinoseki. And so pretty much 2 or 3 times a week would come in and spend the day at Basie with Swifty and some of their other old pals. Now, remember, this is Saturday morning in rural Japan, and you've got Swifty there in his blazer and sunglasses, and then you've got the ex-editor of Playboy magazine Japan coming in looking like $1 million, and I swear before he can even get adjusted in his seat, a bottle of wine and a glass was put down right next to him.
That's
and he
right,
proceeded to just crack into this wine at 11:45 in the morning.
Exactly.
So these two guys were living a retired life that is certainly one that I want to aspire to. So we ended up talking with the two of them, and there were a couple other people who came in who sat down, and one of whom spoke a little English, was very interested in our project. And I remember as the time went by, I sort of lost track of the time. When I looked and saw that it was already 12:30, I was wondering, like, oh man, is Philip going to have time to take the pictures? Because if we miss our train up here way in the north, our whole day is going to be messed up because there's only one train an hour.
Yeah, well, true to form, you were knocking back the free beers. Although, to be fair, on this occasion, you did take up the weight of the conversational duties, because I felt sort of like, not trapped, but I felt a little bit like, we've been invited over here. So the last thing I want to do, obviously, is be rude and wander off. And I remember then on a couple of occasions, him encouraging me, oh, do you need to go upstairs? Do you want to take some more photos? So that kind of gave me the out. And actually, one of his staff then did take me. So what you can't see perhaps quite as clearly here, or there's a few hints of it, is there's a whole second floor to this building. And part of it is kind of open plan in a way that you can look over into the performance space below from the second floor. And so she took me up there and gave me a sort of a tour of the building, and I took a lot of photos. You can see in particular there's a whole collection of drum skins that many of which were signed by Elvin Jones, who obviously spent a fair bit of time there when he was living in Japan. And also then I think perhaps one of the stories that I have told the most about this project is undoubtedly this beautiful portrait you can see here of Count Basie, who obviously gives his name to the place. And he's holding that apple with his name very intricately carved into the skin. So I took a photograph of that, and then obviously as I was coming down the stairs, I was chatting to the lady and said, oh, that's a beautiful portrait. Where did you get it from? And of course then she said very casually, oh, the master, meaning Swifty Sugawara, he took that photograph. And I said, oh, right, wow. She said, yes, he also carved Count Basie's name into the skin of the apple. And I just thought to myself, well, of course he did. Of course he did. I mean, why would I have thought anything else? And again,
sure.
it highlights, this incredible relationship that a lot of these owners had with very specific jazz musicians, to whom they're then paying homage by naming their places after them. And you can see not just from that photograph, obviously, all over the place is Count Basie's name, and in some cases as well, a lot of tributes being paid to Elvin Jones here, there, and everywhere.
I mean, it's remarkable. That portrait is just so gorgeous, and I mean, I can only just kind of giggle thinking of him saying like, "Oh, Count, can you give me just 5 more minutes? I've almost got the shape of your name in the apple. I might need to just another minute with the toothpick here, you know." Yeah, you see that picture, and it's really interesting because we've mentioned how memorabilia and you know, posters and concert posters and this and that is a big part of the charm of a lot of these jazz joints. But then you see one like that you took next to that. Is that a French horn? Yeah, it's a French horn. And you see Elvin Jones Jazz Machine live at Basie. Just think about the space as you see the pictures of Basie here, and think about hearing the Elvin Jones Jazz Machine. I mean, I'm almost speechless just thinking about it. Let alone the volume would be overwhelming, but like how unbelievably cool it would be to hear that band in this space. I mean, it shows you again that of all the countries in the world that love jazz, there's nowhere that takes it to this level like Japan does. It's just simply the best. You know, that's all I can say. I mean, it's just the best. There's nothing else like it. And I was so happy. I remember when the conversation kind of died down and I got up to take one more look around, and I went up and I looked behind the counter, and that's your third picture here that you have in sequence of the records behind the bar. And I remember thinking, like, you know, if I lived in a place like this, which is, again, a rather nondescript rural town, you know, but I was able to create a space like this that became well-known worldwide. I mean, it's almost like a dream. You know, you can't really imagine it because I've been trying to think of an equivalent comparison, and the only thing that I could come up with, and Americans will understand this, is the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is in a town called Cooperstown in upstate New York, really far from New York City, at least a good 6-hour drive. It's really hard to get to. Cooperstown is just a small town in upstate New York, but anybody that loves baseball will make a pilgrimage up there and spend the weekend visiting the museum, because when you walk in, the entire history of baseball is in this one museum. That's what Basie felt like to me. I felt like you have to go so far up north to the middle of nowhere, but you walk in and the entire history of jazz is located, not only just jazz as a music from America, but of jazz in Japan, which is what our project is about. So it was almost kind of like a sense of validation for me. It was like, yeah, this is it. This is why everybody's been telling me to come here for all these years. And I'm just such a dumbass that it took me 10 years to do it, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, thinking back now, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but thinking that you hadn't actually been there at that point, and that I'm glad in a way that we got to go together, not to get too sentimental, obviously, but you know, it was great that we were able to experience it, because it was undoubtedly one of the defining experiences of the project to date. And I mean, I think it's a classic example, I suppose, of, you know, if you build it, they will come, because like you said, you know, he was down in Shinjuku in that sort of hotbed of counterculture that we've talked about in the 60s, with the jazz music and the jazz culture, and yet he made that decision to return to this place, which, you know, again, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago was a lot less accessible than it is now, and set up this beautiful place, and people did come, and you know, not only that, it's become the legendary place in Japan for jazz joints. I mean, there's just so many little touches, looking at the photographs even, you know, just things like even this beautiful sticker on the piano, you know, on the side of the piano. And then obviously you can see there on the other side, he's got that the Count Basie Theatre from New York sticker on the front of the piano. And it's just an astonishing place. And it's the kind of place as well, you do wonder and you do fear of what will happen when it can no longer function. You know, it's the sort of place that I suspect in perhaps other countries it would be preserved as a museum for posterity, but I guess possibly in Japan that once it's gone, it'll be gone.
Yeah, you know, we've talked a lot about that before, right? How mainstream Japan and the sort of mainstream cultural awareness of this part of the jazz world in Japan is pretty much zero. And if they do have any, they don't really care. Most people would consider this just to be, you know, of no interest. You know, I mean, if you went to the local city government and said, hey, can you landmark it, for example, so they can't tear the building down. That would just never happen. But I think because Basie is so well known, because there are so many people connected to it, as far as I understand, Sugawara-san does not have any children. But maybe that's incorrect. But if he does, it doesn't seem that they are affiliated with the place. I think that's something that maybe to double check on, because as you mentioned, the two staff who were in there the morning that we were there were two fairly young ladies, I would say in their late 20s. Now, they might have been just doing part-time work and are not part of his family. But I think that Basie's is such a special place and so well known that it will continue even if he can't run it anymore. I mean, this is its 50th anniversary this year. You know, it opened in 1970. He's just turned 78 years old. As you can see, he smokes all day long and drinks like a fish. So I don't know how good his health is, but I mean, he's been doing this for 50 plus years. So maybe his body can withstand it. But it's certainly, yeah, it's kind of poignant, you know, because it connects to everything that we've been talking about doing this project, which is to document a vanishing world, as you've put on the top of the website.
Yeah.
These places are vanishing. And if Basie were to vanish, it would be nothing less than a tragedy as a jazz fan, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I, for one, am grateful that I had the opportunity to visit it. Certainly, I know if I was back in Japan at any point in the next 18 months or 2 years, I will definitely make the effort and hang the expense to get up there and visit it again. I'd love, of course, to take a portrait of him to him as well. Just to sort of round off things maybe in terms of Basie, James, a bit of a shorter episode this week, but we did want to dedicate a whole episode just to Basie for the reasons we've already described. But just having a look at the final photograph in the series there of Basie, there's a few things that perhaps worth drawing out, which we may or may not have noticed in the past. I'd say for me, there's four things there. I always remember this beautiful red rose on top of the piano. And I tried very hard to photograph it in a much more artistic way and failed miserably, but it's made it into that photograph for sure. And I just thought, again, just a very nice and very unnecessary touch, but someone's taken the time and effort to put it in there for the ambience. The other thing then is, you mentioned last week's episode about octet. I mean, I would say certainly looking at that photograph that his record collection's got to be pushing that number surely. From what's there, you know, I don't know. It's hard to estimate these things, and I'm sure a few collectors could probably tell us by looking. But I'd be surprised if that's any less than 5,000 or 6,000, certainly on the wall, and perhaps possibly more. Then, if you look on the table, of course, you may have spotted the glass ashtray. So perhaps there is some truth, or there was some truth to that story, however cryptically it was told by the owner of Royce. And then finally, in the right-hand corner, perhaps the only jazz joint that we've ever been in which featured a photocopier.
What is that doing there?
Now, we did have a fax machine in a previous episode.
Fax machine, I would expect. A photocopier, yeah. I mean, well, you know, look, we know that he, as someone who is not just the owner of the club, but, you know, very connected to, obviously, live performing, you know, producing gigs, writing, photographing. Maybe he has got a lot of the business things going on, so he needs that as part of his office. I mean, certainly the table he was sitting at and the cabinets behind were covered with enough non-jazz related paperwork and folders and old bills that, you know, it is pretty much his office in there. Philip, man, I just realized by looking at this picture, because I didn't notice it the last time. Shit. This one that we're talking about, up on the wall above the piano, it says the Elvin Jones Quartet with Wynton Marsalis live at Basie. I have the live recording that from when Elvin Jones was here with Wynton Marsalis. They recorded at the Pit Inn, and they did a live version of A Love Supreme, but featuring Wynton on trumpet, no saxophone. And that's one of my most treasured CDs, because I bought it the first birthday that I had in Japan. So I'd been in Japan about 5 or 6 months, and it's always a tradition of mine. On my birthday, I go record shopping or CD shopping by myself to buy myself some presents. So had been in Japan only a few months, and I was going to go look for a bigger record shop, but I happened to pop into, do you remember the store Book Off? It's like a discount book chain. Yeah. So they always have like CDs, used CDs in there. So I popped in and I just looked around. I found some jazz CDs and there it was. It was Elvin Jones and Wynton Marsalis live at the Pit Inn. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. I'm finally in Japan. And here I am buying for my birthday a CD recorded at the Pit Inn, which I had not yet been to. So that was obviously on the same tour because they had not toured together other than that, coming to Japan. So what must have happened was they recorded at the Pit Inn and then came up to Basie and played live there. I mean, just think about that. Wow.
And I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere there exists a recording of that as well. But
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Well, look, I think that's probably a beautiful place to finish this episode. That was Basie. It is undoubtedly the best. And if you have been to it, you'll know what we're talking about. If you haven't been to it, we recommend that when you get to Japan, or if you're already there, you make the effort to go and see it. And in the meantime, please check out the photographs on tokyojazzjoints.com/Basie for this one. And of course, the whole project website you can get tokyojazzjoints.com. If you don't already follow us on social media, we're at Tokyo Jazz Joints, all the usual platforms. And of course, if you do, thank you so much for your support for the project. Thank you also for the messages of encouragement and support that we get on a weekly basis. If you're living anywhere in the world and you're listening and you think that somewhere near you there's a jazz place that keeps the spirit and the atmosphere of these jazz kisa alive, please get in touch with us. We'd love to reach out to people and feature them for interviews like we've done already with a couple of places in other countries. And we'll be back next week with episode 26. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, keep listening. And James, you have a good week.
You too, buddy. We're halfway home.
We are indeed. Take it easy.
Ciao.
Hi, everyone. What you're about to hear now is a short story, which I wrote a couple of years ago for a magazine. It's a fictionalized version of our first trip to Basie that we've just discussed on the podcast. The sound design for the short story was done by Brian of Grooves Ahead, so thank you to him, and thanks for all the work that he's done on the podcast project since we first started. We hope you enjoy the short story, and we hope that someday, somehow, you get the chance to go to Basie and experience what we also got to experience when we visited. Enjoy the story, and we'll see you all next week. So what time will you be opening on Saturday then? I asked. I don't know, I'm not a fucking train timetable, am I? Came the gruff response from the other end of the line. Before the slightly too long silence that told me I was the only person left on the call. More evidence to challenge the myth that all Japanese are polite, I remember thinking, grinning to myself slightly. They're not. And if they don't know you, they don't have to be. In fact, you could be led to believe that Japanese men over a certain age had dispensed with the inconvenience of words altogether, replacing them with a series of grunts, guttural noises and loud interjections. But that answer had been as good as we were going to get. We took it as a green light for a trip we couldn't really afford, an utterly ridiculous decision to anyone but me or my partner in this mad project. But that was a few weeks back. And this was now. I mean, this was fucking it. Our Wigan casino. Our electric ballroom. Our mecca of Japanese jazz joints. 4.5 hours on a bullet train slicing through the endless sprawl and carbon copy factory towns of the Japanese countryside was nearing its end. An early morning rendezvous at Tokyo Station had brought us here to the end of months of anticipation. Months of being told by jazz joint owners about the legendary Basie, run by the most famous of all the owners. A shining beacon, a bastion of jazz joint culture holding firm against the relentless onslaught of Japanese modernity and development. Like many of its peers, Basie was named in honour of the musician its owner most admired and was tucked away in the rundown red light district of an ageing, nondescript Japanese provincial town. For over 40 years it had weathered in turn snowplough winters and summers which could rot wood with their humidity. It probably wouldn't withstand an earthquake, but mercifully, not least for us, that was something with which it had yet to contend. A journey that had begun 2 years previously as just an idea and then an experiment had gradually burgeoned into a countrywide quest to photograph the hundreds of rapidly vanishing jazz bars and kisa coffee shops which for decades had anchored the soil of Japan's jazz landscape. And whichever dingy bar or grimy post-war cafe we found ourselves in, only one name had been so consistently and reverently uttered. Basie. The same name that we can now see carved in a small sign hanging on the glass-panelled wooden door in front of us. The deep orange hue and faint sound of music bleeding through the smoky glass indicates at least that the trip has not been in vain. Basie is open. I steady myself, take a deep breath and place my hand apprehensively on the door. It opens into a large, cavernous room as dark and moody as the street behind me is bright and sun-drenched. The hushed black and brown tones of the interior are fringed with red and orange from the hanging lamps and bar lights. Posters, photos, record sleeves, autographs, ticket stubs and other jazz paraphernalia cover the walls, all of them reflecting off the large black piano in the middle of the floor, giving the whole place the impression of a jazz-themed fairground hall of mirrors. Altar-like, at the back of the space sits the mythical JBL sound system, beckoning customers towards its ear-defying volume. The enormous handmade wooden speakers dominate the room and all the furniture faces respectfully in their direction. Listening is not an option. It is a requirement. It is the whole fucking point. If jazz is a religion for so many Japanese, then this is the shrine at which they worship. I nod politely at the woman cleaning glasses behind the bar as we sit down at the table and watch her face almost imperceptibly fall at the prospect of having to deal with bumbling foreign customers who have stumbled in here out of some vague curiosity. We try to walk a fine line between the sheer excitement of digesting everything we're seeing and feeling and not looking like gormless tourists, so overwhelmed that we blow the whole thing. It's unlikely we will be back anytime soon, so any visit is potentially the last. We never know how much longer each joint will stay open, and even the most revered are not immune from old age, sickness, unreasonable rent hikes and lack of customers. "What can I get you?" asks the woman quietly as she approaches the table. "Oh, just 2 beers, please," says my partner. Shifting in my chair, out of the corner of my eye, I catch the other reason we came all this way to Basie. Sat across from the bar at a huge round wooden table is the master, of whom we have heard so many legendary tales. His salt and pepper hair is parted neatly to the side, and he sports an immaculately pressed cream blazer complete with pocket square. Wearing sunglasses in the warm yellow light where he sits, he holds a thick black fountain pen in his hand. Pausing from time to time for thought, he then writes carefully constructed lines of poetry into a book filled with the intricate shapes of Japanese calligraphy. Sitting there, right in front of us, I can't help but wonder if he would even be believable to others except in a work of fiction. He looks for all the world like some Hollywood movie crime kingpin between vendettas, sunglasses keeping his nervy henchmen guessing constantly where his gaze will fall. The arrival of our drinks startled me out of this silent surveillance. "Here you are, enjoy." Sorry. One thing. The truth is, I begin hesitantly, we have come from Tokyo, especially today. As soon as I say it, I know how it sounds. This joint has been here for over 40 years, and here we are, some gaijin interlopers looking for special treatment simply because we have come to visit. The woman smiles tolerantly. "Would it be okay to take some photographs for a project we're currently doing?" I ask. "Yes, of course," she says. "Just please don't photograph the customers." Well, this has become a fairly standard reply. Jazz joints are private spaces for private people, and there are no more private people than the Japanese. I have become adept at shooting the backs of heads or grabbing the interior shots guerrilla style, using that temporary window when a customer goes to the toilet and clears the space. No wives or bosses will ever see their husbands or employees in a jazz joint from my photos. These places still retain a little of their bohemian counterculture feel for the Japanese, so most have never been or would ever dream of going to one. I take out my camera, my nerves causing me to over-exaggerate the selection of lens before grabbing some shots from where I'm sitting. Confidence up, I begin to explore a little further from the table. Rather than wandering around for a long time, I am conscious of photographing in short and unobtrusive bursts, and today is no exception. I can see the master in my peripheral vision as I slide back into the leather booth for another sip of my drink, still processing how incredible this place is. Like so many others we have been lucky enough to visit. They never disappoint in their sheer variety, living museums of a musical culture at once unified in their purpose, yet each one unique in character. As I settle back into my seat to enjoy Eric Dolphy live at the 5 Spot wash over us at ear-splitting volume, the woman reappears silently beside our table. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to disturb you, but the master would like to talk with you, if that's okay." He was also a photographer. Fuck yes, I think. Although its sort of whimpering sound is all that emerges from my mouth. My partner doesn't need asking twice, though, and is up like a shot. The woman takes it as a yes, nods, and within seconds a phalanx of staff arrive to move our drinks, snacks, bags and jackets across the room to the large round table where the master holds court. We walk over nervously, desperate not to mess this chance up. Taking a seat at his table, we nod politely and smile in that Japanese way which wordlessly acknowledges an invitation. His middle finger dominated by a large silver skull ring, he returns the nod and reaches deftly into his jacket pocket, producing 2 beautifully embossed white business cards. Turning them round so the text faces outwards, he holds the card at both corners between thumb and index finger before coolly sliding each one in turn through the air between us. We receive them respectfully in both hands, heads slightly bowed, and look down to read the text. Below the Basie logo in the top left-hand corner, it reads simply, Shoji Swifty Sugawara, Master. This is it. The inner circle, I think, trying to keep my cool as I place the card gently down to my right on the table and look back up. For the briefest instant, I catch my partner's eye, and it's enough to tell me we're thinking the exact same thing. Basie. It simply doesn't get any better.